Hello and welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. I'm Joe Devine and I'm joined now by Seb Stafford-Bloor.
Hello Joe Devine, welcome back.
Guten Tag, and Alex Stewart.
So nice to have an upbeat hello at the beginning of the podcast again.
Oh, really, you can feel that
Spring
energy
on
coming from you. Exactly, yeah, it's like that scene in Ghostbusters. Now, Guten Tag, Herr Stafford-Bloor. Tell us about your German lessons. Are you learning much?
Yeah, I'm having some difficulty with tenses, but I am practicing and I am having conversation with my father-in-law over the breakfast table, and we're getting better.
You're a real linguist. And Alex, how's your new flat working out?
Yeah, it's fine, thank you.
So glad I'm back. Right, today's episode is about international football. I know, it fucking sucks, but we're going to talk about it anyway. We talk about England's team and what's happening in the... Who's going to play in the Euros? Can they win the Euros? Maybe they can. Who knows? We're going to talk about that for the first sort of 20 minutes. And then the last bit, we talk about something which has no answer or resolution, which is the Qatar World Cup and human rights atrocities and the Norway team demonstrating against that. So, that's today's episode. And I'm, again, just delighted to be back. Thanks for downloading. Hope you enjoy everything that we have to say today. Okay, no more from me now until after this musical interlude, at which point there will be more of me. And also, Seb Stafford-Bloor and Alex Stewart, we leave you now in the cool embrace and the warm hands of international football. Okay, Albania 0 to England. The first note I have here is, who really cares? Seb, who really cares? Apart from Harry Kane, who obviously cares.
Certainly not me, Joe, because I took the dog for a walk in the middle of the second half.
Sure.
I at 2-0 it was over. I didn't feel like I was going to learn anything else from that game. And I just tapped out of international football for an hour.
Sure. Yeah.
I have since watched the rest of the game. I've completed the task. I just not with any real enthusiasm or
Yeah. I was watching it and thinking, I saw Harry Kane's goal and I thought, well, that's a good goal. He's really tried hard to score that goal. And then afterwards he was very pleased. And there was a moment when he was walking off after his teammates had finished celebrating with him, and you can see him sort of mouthing "yes, yes" to himself. And I remember thinking, you're very enthusiastic, and I think maybe you're the most enthusiastic person, perhaps apart from Gareth Southgate, in all of England after that's happened. Because, who really cares? And then I started to think, isn't it amazing that the disconnect between non-tournament times and tournament times? Because I know that in June, I'm going to go crazy. I'm going to get all caught up in it and all excited. And I'm going to really, really care. But until then, I don't care at all.
For the World Cup, I remember that. You turned up in with a St George's Cross. I mean,
no, that's a weird flex. No, I didn't. No,
you also wore
didn't.
chainmail,
yeah. That's just to protect myself from, flagrants on the old roads of London. Yeah, and verbal assaults. But it's quite. The thing is, though, it really got me thinking. That did, because the only other thing I could think of that is anything like that is a bit. Well, two things maybe is like smoking and lung cancer. Is that you do it, and knowing that lung cancer is a probable outcome, but it doesn't really mean anything until you get it, right? But also just death, because it doesn't really matter unless it's happening to you. Do you know what I'm saying? What else is there where the switch flips so easily between caring and not caring? It's not a thing, is it?
Income tax is a little bit like that, I think.
Go on, expand.
Well, at the risk of being audited, yeah, I suppose. But I guess sort of for 11 and a half months of the year, income tax is a really, really good thing. And I absolutely loathe anybody that tries to persuade me otherwise.
Sure.
And then when self-assessment deadline comes around and you end up paying a huge amount out of your bank account, it feels like less of a good thing. It doesn't feel very satisfying.
Right. Well, that's
it's kind of the same in the inverse.
So is that,
Well, no, because I actually...
That's like a temporal inverse, isn't it?
That's a sort of traditional position for the wealthy, isn't it? I think one thing that we probably do need to talk about, don't want to give your money away to the poor people, do you? I know. One thing we probably should talk about is, it's a bit like workhouses in the old days, is how different this team is
a little bit
to...
like workhouses in the old days.
It's how different this team is to the one that played in the World Cup in 2018. Because it's actually, about half of this, the starters in this game were the same as the starters from Croatia. And it struck me, whilst I was watching, something that was interesting is, who were the players that featured in those World Cup games? I remember them so fondly, but I didn't remember the full lineup. It turns out Kane, Sterling, Maguire, Stones and Walker were all starters for Croatia in the semi-final. We assume Henderson would be a starter or featuring, but for current injury, of course. So that's maybe 6 of the starting 11. Potentially 7, depending on the Pickford situation. We're not really sure how that's going to play out. But the other players, Ashley Young is gone. Trippier, there is some conversation around as well. Dele Alli obviously hasn't appeared in the squad. And Lingard, who was brought on as a sub in this game. So what interests me about that is the team that was sort of young and exciting and fresh in 2018 now actually has quite a lot of tournament experience, or at least England experience, whilst still being, fairly young and exciting. Is this the tournament that they come of age, Alex?
It's a possibility, isn't it? Dele Alli is not playing because someone like, Spurs' former side, but someone like Phil Foden or Mason Mount is taking his place, and that's very legitimate. I think also it's difficult to look past those players that are still around and see who would necessarily be better than them. There are arguments, obviously, that Dominic Calvert-Lewin is a different type of striker to be used under different circumstances, but it's obvious that Kane is legitimately the best English striker. I think, Sterling is part of that wide player conversation that includes people like Jadon Sancho and Jack Grealish and Foden if he plays in that position. But again, Sterling is consistently good and brings a lot of different things. So it feels like this is it's a sensible sticking with what's known. It's not a kind of knee-jerk, let's go back to what worked in the previous tournament, even though we're overlooking all of these exciting young players. There are very legitimate reasons for selecting all of them.
Yeah, and even with Maguire and Stones, it's obviously fantastic that Stones is back to the form that he's in now, but it's quite nice to go into a second tournament knowing presumably that when England do play a back 4, that will be your 2, and when they play a back 3, they'll probably just add Walker to that. There's a fair amount of consistency there, isn't there? And that's, from a defensive perspective, that's actually quite that excites me.
Yeah, I think it's really important. Obviously Declan Rice will probably screen in front of that, but the relationships between players on the pitch in the areas that they work, so whether that's the right-hand side or the forward line or the central defensive partnership, are really, really important. And if they're used to playing with each other, they've been playing in a back 3 previously, but they're now getting used to playing in a back 4 as well, because there's quite a good chance that will be relevant in certain fixtures, although I do think Southgate will go back to a back 3 for some of the harder fixtures. You want to develop that fluency and that understanding, find that again from what they achieved in 2018 and build a partnership. And that central defensive partnership is sort of the bedrock of everything else that goes forwards from it. I would chuck the goalkeeper in that as well. And I think, yes, Pickford is better at kicking, but I still wouldn't select him. I think Pope's been better. I'd probably pick Dean Henderson if he continues to get an extended run of games for United.
What's the status with Henderson's injury? Because presumably, if he is available for the tournament, he would be the obvious choice alongside Rice. They complement each other fairly well, right?
You would think so. Again, it depends what sort of balance he goes for. And against Albania, it started off as more of a 4-2-3-1, and then Calvin Phillips was allowed to push forwards and Mount was able to come back a little bit, so it morphed into more of a 4-3-3 after half-time. Henderson works really well on that right-hand side. One of the big arguments for continuing with him, though, was the understanding that he has with Trent Alexander-Arnold, who looks like he's probably not going to get selected. But again, Henderson also brings experience, he brings leadership, and I think it's important to have figures in the team who do all of that, as well as being, genuinely good at football. So I suspect he would do that, and then you'd have probably a more aggressive, forward-looking midfielder on the left-hand side, which would, I suspect, quite obviously be Mason Mount.
Whose iPhone was that?
Mine, sorry.
How dare you?
I know.
How dare you come to this podcast?
Do you know what? Normally I'm really on top
iPhone
of that stuff, but
that is disgraceful. I was just reading a piece while you were talking that says that Jordan Henderson's injury will run close towards the end of the season. Hard to know if he's going to feature or not.
I think you take him in the squad anyway, though, just because he's the kind of character that you would want around there. And if there's, England have taken players to major tournaments knowing that they'll only be fit for the second or third game.
Yeah.
And Henderson's the kind of guy that you would want around.
Get him on the plane.
I don't know. England have done that quite a few times, but it's always been a little bit of a disaster. Obviously, the Rooney situation repeated a couple of times. Jack Wilshere seemed to have a free pass to international tournaments for a while. Beckham went as a kind of travelling cheerleader to South Africa. And I listened to an interview with Rob Green where he said that Beckham did a good job of consoling him after his mistake against the United States. But it feels like that's a negative familiarity for England. The idea that, if Jordan Henderson's able to kind of step onto a Premier League pitch sometime between now and the end of the season, then he's of value to the squad. I don't know. I think you want all the bodies, particularly at the end of this season, because it's quite likely that, with what's it going to be, maybe 2 or 3 week break between the end of the season and the start of the Euros, it's going to be an awful lot of tired muscles, potentially a lot of injuries going through the tournament. I think I want all 23 of my players to be fit and ready to go and to actually play.
He wants it, though.
He does. He does good passion faces as well. And no doubt at Liverpool, he's a hugely valuable character. But I don't know. I think you have to have some reassurance over what he can do physically before you allow him to get on the plane or train or whatever mode.
I was away on holiday last week, right? So I missed all the Trent Alexander-Arnold thing. What's going on? Why is he not playing?
The argument is form that he's not been that great for Liverpool of late, which is partly true. I mean, it's as much an enormous drop-off from just how good he was in the 2 seasons previous. England are also very well stocked with right-backs. There is a bit of inconsistency. Ian Wright highlighted on the ITV coverage that Southgate's quite happy to pick other players who are going through very, very poor spells of form, highlighting the consistency of selecting Pickford, for example, but also Eric Dyer, is another one who hasn't really excelled for his club, but still gets into the squad. It's probably as much a reflection of just how strong England are at right back as anything else.
So who is in the squad, presuming that they were going to play a back three? Who is playing at wing back?
Trippier.
Right, who's also had a fantastic season.
Yeah.
Okay. Fucking hell. That seems a bit strong.
It's pretty harsh. It's just...
I mean, he's the best right back. He is England's best right back when he's playing well, by quite some distance, right?
Reece James as well. I mean, Reece James started against San Marino.
Yeah.
It just happens to be a position where England have a lot of very good players of different types and qualities, some of whom simply aren't going to get near the squad.
But I mean, with Alexander-Arnold, is Southgate really not going to take him to the European Championships? I don't believe that for a second.
He's got to go.
Exactly. And so we were talking earlier about defensive continuity and the benefits of that and the value of having Stones and Maguire as a kind of a first choice pairing. I mean, what's really the value of leaving Alexander-Arnold out of this squad for a form reason, and then picking him in a month's time as part of the provisional 30?
It doesn't make any sense at all.
It also, I don't know
if that's what's going to happen, though. There is a very real chance that Alexander-Arnold doesn't go to the Euros.
That would be insane to me.
Well, yeah, me too. I think there's zero chance of him not going. And also it feels like a young player. You're kind of pointing the finger at him for a problem which at Liverpool is club wide. There aren't many players in that Liverpool side who have performed even to a kind of 7 out of 10 standard this season. you're kind of saying, right, well, you're not a prisoner of what's happening at Liverpool and the kind of the cumulative whatever, the collective. To say that kind of what's happened to him this season deserves dropping internationally, I don't really agree. And also, I'd say he's actually improved at Liverpool over the last few weeks. He's had a bad season, but he's had prior to the international break, he had a better 2 or 3 weeks, I thought. Anyway.
It doesn't make sense to me, but I can also see what the justification is. That's the point I'm making. I would still pick him. But,
get him on the plane.
Or I don't know. Maybe I'd pick Reece James. It's
no,
tricky,
you're just one of those people who likes to have an alternative opinion. I refuse you. You cannot have Reece James over Trent Alexander-Arnold in no world currently in this world is that the right decision to make.
Sure.
But I do like Reece James, but Trent Alexander-Arnold has to be having a 4 out of 10 to be at that level.
I think you take those two and you take Kyle Walker because of his versatility, the fact he can play in those two formations, and then I think you're well covered.
Yeah. As I said, get him on the plane. How likely are England to actually win the Euros? Because I was looking at the aggregated odds yesterday just to see what the market thinks, the gambling market. And they think, apparently, I don't know if it's just a sort of Google ranking thing, because I'm in England, this is what I'm getting. But England and France are favourites to win, sort of joint favourites to win, with Belgium second or third, depending on how you would like to look at that. I guess it surprised me a little bit, but and I know England always have higher odds than they probably should going into a tournament, or lower odds, however it works, whatever the language is. But I guess actually, performed very well. Semi-finalists in the 2018 World Cup have a very strong team. That we are discussing the number of right backs available, for example, is probably a good indicator of how well the team could perform. What are your expectations, Seb?
Well, I can kind of make sense of that, Joe, just because if you look around Europe, there are a lot of really underperforming sides. Spain are having a difficult moment, to use football parlance. Had a draw against Greece and looked pretty unconvincing against Georgia over the weekend. Yeah. Germany are kind of underwhelming, and if I could understand the language better, I would probably imagine there'd be a pretty fierce debate about that happening.
A real linguist.
Yeah, but there's a lot of loud, angry words being used. I don't know what any of them mean, but it sounds pretty contentious. Italy are less than convincing. Holland I'll be honest, Holland look absolutely dreadful. They were demolished by Turkey before the weekend. So England...
Get them on the plane.
Get them on the plane. England, almost by default, you can make a case for. Belgium, I prefer. I think Belgium are a little bit more balanced. I think they're better. Better goalkeeper, better defence, better midfield. And also you have to imagine that eventually Eden Hazard is going to return to some kind of form and be of value there. Yeah. So... But England are in that conversation, and for once, it doesn't feel so stupid. It doesn't feel like just a hopelessly patriotic nonsense of an argument.
Alex, though, the thing is, right, do you remember the 2018 World Cup? We were together, you and I, and we felt we had our finger on the pulse of the nation, and we knew that there were the lowest expectations for some time, and that felt nice and clear and like fresh air. And now I feel like, actually, the expectations are pretty high again as a result of the strong performance. And in fact, probably get the face painted, get the chainmail. Many people think that, if I have the chainmail on, we could actually win. Do you remember those heady days of low expectation when everybody thought England were just fucked? That was fun.
Yeah, I think...
I preferred that.
I think there's an interesting conversation around this, because the way that Southgate has gone about this World Cup qualification set of fixtures has been quite pragmatic, and we're not shoehorning a load of really exciting young attacking players into the side and being all gung-ho and everything, which would actually be quite fun to see. But I think the plus side to being a bit more conservative and a bit more dull is that it probably serves to keep expectations a little bit lower.
It's also tournament football, baby.
Well, yeah, it is definitely tournament football, and tournament football is about pragmatism. So I think, there's a world in which you play Grealish and Foden and Sterling and Mount and it's Sancho. It's hugely exciting, and England then probably lose to a very canny Belgian side in the semi-finals or something. This feels like a more prosaic but intelligent way to go about things. I mean, I think also there are other teams in that. I agree with Seb about the Netherlands, Germany, so on. I think Italy are okay. I think Croatia are still probably quite a good side. Turkey are maybe a dark horse to look out for.
Turkey is strangely good. They've had a real resurgence.
It's very, very difficult. You can't. I think with tournament football, you can't just look at who the best sides are on paper and go, well, they're the ones that'll go through, because it kind of gets into a crapshoot at the end, doesn't it? So,
but for expectations, you can, right? And this is the thing. For the way I look at it is that we're in a different.
Trying to temper expectations, Joe, to build.
I know you are. I know you are. But the reality is, right? All
the reality
we can
is
do.
England will win. It'll be amazing.
Well, this is it.
It'll
you
be
and
the
I
best
are but
summer of our
conduits,
lives.
Yeah? We're feeling
something.
the flow of the
They'll
nation.
Bored out of the tournament by a Didier Deschamps team at some point.
But we're in a different part of the cycle now, and the point I'm making is that 2 years ago the expectations were, rock bottom for a number of reasons. One, England only ever disappoint you. That's the main one, and it's a bit like being in a relationship where you're ground down over a decade, and then you come to expect pain and horror. That's
You've used this analogy
ordinary.
Before.
I don't know what you're talking about. And
really
number two, no. And number two, Gareth Southgate. Gareth Southgate, and I love him and his tight little waistcoats. But 2 years ago, before any of the World Cup success, Gareth Southgate was synonymous with England failure. Right? That's just true. The way that people viewed him was in this country was revolved around that penalty miss. And it's just a kind of fact, right? And all of these things also, a new manager, new relationships, new players, lots of young players, that put us at the beginning of the cycle. Did extremely well, semi-finals, right? Now, 2 years later, we're at the Euros. We've got a team which is kind of not yet at its peak, but is hitting there. I imagine the average age is probably around 25, 26, something like that. That's a guess. The expectation, presumably, this summer, is to win. And anything less than maybe getting to the final probably will feel like a disappointment, because Gareth Southgate has now been in the job for a number of years, because we have seen how well they did last time, because they're not so young anymore, because it's not an unknown quantity, and because now, crucially, England don't always just disappoint. We've had an Indian summer, yeah? I felt that things are back on track, and maybe it was right that we were married and we'd bought this place together, and, do you understand what I'm saying?
I mean, are England
crushing
currently...
bitter disappointment coming? That's what I'm saying.
No, I would say it's reasonable to suggest that England are in the 4 or 5 best teams in Europe at the moment.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily translate to getting into the final 4 at the Euros.
No.
There's at St George's Park, there is a clock which is ticking down to the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, which is, symbolises obviously England's ambition to win the tournament. So you have to believe that internally, with a kind of, a lot of this stuff is attached to the England DNA movement of the last decade, but still, the aim is very much to win these tournaments, not just to go, well, we had a good quarterfinal run, or, we lost valiantly on penalties in the semi-final. They are there to win. All this talent that's been stocked up and developed, it's being aimed at these next 2 tournaments. This is the cycle that England have been targeting for a really long time.
And when did that cycle start, Seb?
It's about 10 years now, maybe 9 years. So it's been a long time.
Oh, I'm getting excited. I'm actually getting excited now. Maybe we just needed to have this chat before the Albania game, and I might have enjoyed it. Grealish, Jack Grealish. I don't really understand. Has he been selected for the squad at all, Seb?
Yeah, he has done. He's just injured at the moment, so not available. He hasn't been playing for Villa. Obviously, he came off the last international break with his stock higher than it ever has been before, Gareth Southgate. Previously, you don't pay attention to international football between tournaments, but you remember the debate and the kind of Southgate's hesitancy around Grealish. That seems to have gone. He seems to be sort of by national consensus, the one player that everybody wants on the pitch.
But he's got to go, right? He's got to play, yeah?
Yeah, without question. There's a little bit of me which thinks that come tournament time and come the need for, as Alex mentioned, pragmatism, Southgate loses his nerve a little bit around Grealish, I think, and uses him as an impact player. I think that would be a mistake. Grealish is he's a very original sort of player. There aren't very many of him, regardless of where you place him in the kind of the hierarchy of world footballers. He's someone that does stuff on a pitch.
Well, can I say also
where would
that,
you put him though, Seb?
But I was just going to answer that question myself, if I may, because I love Marcus Rashford.
Yeah,
but I would play him on the left.
Yeah, well, I think I agree. I don't really believe in the kind of the binary relationship between Mason Mount and Jack Grealish. I think that's a fallacy. I think I would like Mount at the tip of my midfield, Grealish off the left, Rashford off the right with Kane at centre forward. And
you wouldn't play Sancho?
Well, I would, but he's been injured, and he's got a sort of semi-serious injury at the moment, and I need to see his fitness first. But I would say that him and Rashford are competing for the same place.
Rashford will not want to hear that he's competing for the right forward position. That's certainly not his favoured spot.
I understand. I just think that when you have someone, I think Rashford is a very adaptable player. I think he's pretty good off the right. I prefer him from the left-hand side. I think he's slightly better there, but he's been able to play that role for England in the past, and he's done a pretty good job of it.
So no Sterling?
At the moment, no, I don't think so.
Wow. Big decision.
But I just I don't. Is that really a snub? Just because I think I like Raheem Sterling. I just think that
I just like to respond to people's serious claims with noises that make it sound like it's a snub. Oh, you didn't say that. Go on.
I think Grealish should make a stronger case for himself in that position. That's all.
I agree. I think he's a standout. I think he's first name on the team sheet for me after Harry Kane, probably because Harry Kane's name is cemented on there.
He's not the first name on the team sheet after Kane.
I think he is. He's exciting. He is
What's
exciting. Wrong with you?
My sole concern is that
is this a concern of your soul, or is this your only concern?
I don't believe in souls.
Okay. Yeah.
That there's a quite a real chance if you play Grealish off the left, Mount as the left-sided central midfielder, and have Harry Kane, you get too many players clustering in one position. I think.
Well, then drop Mount.
Kane dropping. Well, yeah, but if you drop Mount, then who gives that progression from midfield?
Steven Gerrard. Get him on the plane.
I can see
like Carlton Palmer, maybe.
Yeah.
I can see a world in which England end up kind of having lots and lots of players that are really good at doing stuff just before the edge of the penalty area.
Yeah.
And then don't have people pushing up inside.
Nothing worse than that. It's like watching bad Spurs under Pochettino, wasn't it? Just everyone's outside the box.
Yeah, and there's lots of intricacy and lots of.
I'll be honest.
I mean, I agree that Grealish does something jazzy and different, and I think he does have that. I just think that there needs to be a real balance in terms of how you fit pieces around him to get the best from him.
Listen, more importantly, though, you've got to have the sex symbol at the international tournament. You've got to have that je ne sais quoi, and that's what Jack Grealish brings. Yeah, you've got to have, in 15 years' time, you've got to be providing material for the archival documentary makers in 15 years' time.
It's the rolled-down socks and the hair flicks.
Yeah,
I get
exactly.
It.
It's very important to my enjoyment.
That hair
of the
will
tournament.
look really, really good when England have had a disappointing exit and his hair is all forlorn and he just looks sad. That he'd make a great poster for that.
Yeah, it really will. Plus, if he does become a incredibly successful best player in the world type player, not obviously he's not going to become the best player in the world, but you know what I'm saying. They will need that footage to sort of play alongside David Beckham and his haircuts, and everyone will love that, and so that's the most important thing here. Anyway, we'll be back after this short break to talk about Norway, a country in the north of Europe. Norway demonstrated. They did a demonstration. Norway's national team players staged a demonstration ahead of their... Seb, we've talked about this before, man. If you click around on the Google plan, loads and loads and loads, when I'm reading, all I see is your name just moving around my screen.
I was actually just scrolling down the Google Doc so I could see the full
You
Norway
clicked
section.
8 times. I saw your name moving.
I saw your name
segment.
as well, Seb. I saw it. You can't get it.
okay.
You need to understand that your actions have implications, yeah? They cause
This is
they
not
cause
a no
effects
consequence
on me.
world.
No, stop affecting me. Norway's national team players staged a demonstration ahead of their recent World Cup qualifier, protesting human rights violations in Qatar by wearing T-shirts with the slogan "Human Rights on and off the pitch." And there have also been discussions within the country about whether the team should actually boycott the tournament. Discuss! Who wants to go first?
It started, I can't remember when, maybe like a month or 3 weeks ago. Tromsø, which is a club in the very north of Norway, signed an open letter from their squad saying that it should be boycotted. And a couple of other Norwegian club sides have followed suit. And I think that's been the impetus for the Norwegian national team to take a relatively, I don't want to say distant stance, because it's still a stance, but it's not a direct kind of, in your face. It's a more subtle form of protest than the letters that were signed by the club sides. But yeah, it's a good thing.
Seb?
Okay, I mean, careful how I make this point, because I don't want it to be misinterpreted. But since the World Cup was awarded, 6,500 migrant workers have died in construction projects relating to the World Cup next year. That's according to a report in The Guardian at the end of last month. So my point is, it's not a point relating to Norway's protest. It just feels quite late in the day for me.
Oh, it's yeah.
I think that's my main take. I like seeing football players show responsibility, and I like FAs taking action like this, and I commend Norway for that. But it feels like football needed to switch into activist mode a long time ago.
The time to protest was after the bid, right?
This is the thing. Like any human life is precious, and any reform is welcome and necessary and good. And I'm not saying otherwise. I just mean that I was expecting this a long time ago, that's all.
The context may be that because of the Black Lives Matter movement and the involvement of various sports stars, not just in football, but also particularly in the NBA with that, I think there's been a kind of a groundswell in the last year or so of sports stars taking a moral stance on issues. And so maybe prior to BLM, it felt like there wasn't necessarily the example of that having been done and done effectively. And maybe that's why players were reticent to express those opinions.
No, that's true. I mean, my take on it is that you're right. I think seeing footballers socially and politically engaged is a positive thing. You would hope that it would sort of extend further to club football too. And I wonder, Seb wrote a good example here or a good question here in the plan, which relates to Haaland, who we saw wearing one of the T-shirts. But what if Haaland does sign for Manchester City or PSG, for example? How far removed are they from responsibility in those sorts of scenarios? It does complicate things, and you can see why footballers particularly struggle to discuss it. The other thing I would like to say is that I think we focused a lot on the number of people who have died, which is obviously a very important number. Reality, too, is that many people who are still alive feel the pangs of kafala, or the sponsorship system, which is used in the Middle East across the region, not just in Qatar, but also in the UAE and in Saudi Arabia and in Oman and Yemen and these other places too. Well, the broad strokes here are that the system works whereby migrants are only allowed to come and work in the country if they're sponsored by a private company or an individual, right? So what happens is that 90% of the population of Qatar are migrant workers. They all exist in the country on the basis of the fact that they are sponsored by their employer to work there. And prior to last August, when there were some changes to the laws, they couldn't leave that employment. Many employers take passports, so you can't just exit the country if you want to. You have to fulfill your contract, so you don't have the same kind of ability as we do here in the UK, for example, to just leave your job if you want to. Obviously, you work your notice period or whatever. In many scenarios, the terms that you agreed when you left your home country and travelled to one of these countries to work are not the terms that are presented when you actually arrive. It's a scam. The laws and the kafala system allows private companies to exploit employees. And this is the situation, right? So last August, there was what has been described as significant labour changes, legal changes by the Qatari government, to the system. There were a lot of positive changes, or a lot of positive proposed reforms that came as a result of this. The main one being that you could change jobs. Imagine that, right? So without requiring your employer's permission to go and get a new job, you could do that. And there are, examples of people having successfully done that. Unfortunately, there are many more examples of people being intimidated by their employers, exploited, people being deported, people being arrested. Basically, the government have tried to change the law. Private business has not responded well to that. And we know from any country that there is often a delay associated with massive law changes like this. To what extent the government of the country and the leaders of the country actually want those changes to occur, and the way that the judicial system is set up to deal with it is really unclear. And I think that's what many Western charitable bodies will have a problem with too. Having said all of this, right, however much the reforms have actually made a difference, there is a guarantee here that the reform only exists because the World Cup is taking place in Qatar, right? Qatar was the first country in the region to make any reforms in this scenario. So we talk about other countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE as well. Obviously, a member of the royal family, the UAE, owns Manchester City. The Qatari Royals own PSG. Manchester City's owners effectively don't allow people, migrant workers who move to their country to work, to change jobs without asking permission of their employer. It's totally unacceptable. It's a total infringement on human rights. There's no world in which that is okay. We talk about that sometimes when it comes to club football. But Qatar, this lesser-known country prior to the World Cup bid, with, in some cases, more stringent kafala laws, more stringent scenarios for migrant workers working there, has made major reforms. Again, we can argue about how significant they've actually been in terms of their application. Has made major reforms purely as a result of the World Cup being there, and have done this first in line in this region. And it really brings to heart the sort of central question of this, which is a question of international cooperation, right? Is the best aim here when trying to make changes to systems of law and culture which are sort of bedded into places for reasons for a very, very long time, is the best approach to that to be internationally cooperative, or is it to impose sanctions on places? And i.e., in this scenario, would be to prevent the World Cup taking place there, to take the World Cup away from taking place in Qatar, where I have no doubt that many of the citizens of Qatar, love football and will be overjoyed that the tournament is taking place there. I don't know anymore. 3 years ago, I thought it was clear cut and black and white, and they couldn't have it, and it was bullshit, and it was totally unacceptable. And it was the wrong thing to do. There was nothing that would change my mind. And now I don't know that I think that anymore. I'm trying to think about what the best means of moving forwards is in the real world.
There's a flip side to that, though, which is Russia, who prior to 2018 made lots of good noises about changing stuff and said they would, open up and liberalise, and is arguably now worse than it was before in terms of its international relations, in terms of how it's behaving as a global citizen. So I get all of those points that you make. I just am very, very suspicious around the long-term intentions of any country that moves partly away from a system that is an abuse of human rights in order that they look okay on the world stage for a period of time. There's nothing to stop them going back on that.
Well, two things. Firstly, Gianni Infantino, president of FIFA, of course, addressed this a couple of days ago. He said he was asked about the role of human rights in World Cup bidding. He made this incredible remark about, which started off as him saying, yes, human rights should absolutely be part of the World Cup bidding process. And then his sentence took a big left turn when he started saying, on the other hand, though, which I just had a hard time kind of rationalizing, because you either do or you don't. I accept I don't know if I accept, but I understand the argument which says that you have to bring external pressure, and one of the things that helps bring external pressure is the awarding of a World Cup. However, I completely reject the idea that World Cups benefit native populations or are staged for their benefit, because they're just countless examples now where tournaments are held in countries where the games are ring-fenced, local traders, local populations are either prevented from capitalising on the tournament's arrival, or they're priced out of the experience. That happened in South Africa, it happened in Brazil, I'm sure it would have happened in Russia. For multiple reports that it has done. I'm not going to prejudge the Qatar tournament, we don't know yet, but this is not a new thing. I mean, it was the argument against the was one of the arguments against the Europa League final between Arsenal and Chelsea being held in Azerbaijan. It was the same situation. Like you're selling tickets for huge amounts of money, which the local population couldn't afford to buy. So you're not doing it to satiate the local love of football. That's FIFA speak, bollocks, and it always has been. So there just has to be a bit more truth about why tournaments go to places and why allowances are made for subpar human rights or labour conditions. You just have to have some kind of moral consistency with this. Is what I'd say.
That's why in the podcast that we had, Seb, when Joe was on holiday, one of my suggestions for international football was this sort of external independent ombudsman that would...
Yeah, that was a really good idea.
That would regulate, and conduct an assessment. And it could be the United Nations Commission for Human Rights. It could be somebody else. But there needs to be somebody that looks at these things and says, well, unless you start doing this stuff ahead of time, you're not actually even going to be considered for the bidding process, because this system that you use here is unlawful, or this minority population is being oppressed, or whatever it is. And it irrespective of the argument about progress, the simple fact is that the amount of money that a host nation generates for a certain proportion of that country, the wealthy elite, is massively, massively advantageous and is more of a reward for that group than any potential progress could be for a minority group or somebody suffering human rights abuses. And that just isn't fair, and it isn't right.
Yeah, it's a good idea. Don't misunderstand me. I think the scenario I'm discussing is the one where we are a year away from the tournament now taking place, right? And trying to take what positives out of it we can. One of which is that after the labour law changes last August, I'm reading 78,000 successful job transfers in the final quarter of the year. That's a good thing. That's a good thing, and it doesn't excuse all of the bad things, and it doesn't mean that the World Cup should be taking place in Qatar, and it doesn't forgive all the deaths that have occurred in building the infrastructure for the World Cup, and it doesn't forgive the fact that this archaic system is even in use at all. It doesn't do any of those things, but it is still 78,000 people who have been freed from one bad situation, theoretically, I believe, as a direct result of international attention due to the World Cup. And that's just a positive that I would like to try and take out of a terrible, shitty situation.
It's definitely a positive. There's also nothing to say that they won't reverse it once the World Cup's finished.
The vast majority of fans are quite understandably going to engage with the tournament. Like, if people are willing to boycott it, to do something else for 4 weeks, okay, that's terrific, and I admire that kind of conviction. But fans should not have to make that decision.
That's the end now, and I bet Seb's disappointed that you wrote all this stuff about all these minnow countries, and we're not going to talk about any of them. Maybe we can talk about them on Friday's podcast. Maybe we can do that, Seb. Would that make you happy, Seb?
Maybe.
Do you know what?
I
You've
certainly
written
didn't get up early to do that
at
reading.
least 250 words here about Luxembourg. When I saw that, I thought, what the fuck's he done? I've only been away for 1 week. What's he doing? But anyway, listen, don't worry. It's I think maybe what was happening was you were preparing for a podcast where I didn't repeatedly interrupt both you and Alex. So you did the right thing, but you forgot that we didn't need that much. But you happy to have me back? Yeah? Yeah.
Nice change of pace.
Sure, a nice change of pace. Anyway, we'll be back next on Friday to discuss. There's more fucking international football, isn't there? Fuck's sake.
I had that exact reaction last night. I thought, oh, that's England's second game. Brilliant, it's over.
Yeah, they're playing on Wednesday. It's their third game.
Wednesday, I thought, for fuck's sake, another game.
Three
in 10 days.
Anyway, what we might do is just like focus it on whatever's coming up at the weekend or something, or talk about something else entirely.
Something non-football related, I reckon. Just
Yeah.
just a chat.
Yeah, maybe we'll just have a chat. Anyway, we'll be back on Friday to do whatever that is. And I'll tell you what we should do. We should do a questions and answers one.
Hey, that's quite a good idea.
That is a good
Let's
one.
do that.
Yeah.
All right,
do that.
we will put out a tweet when this podcast is released. So on the Tuesday, we'll put out a tweet and a YouTube community post asking for questions. If you want to ask us something, please don't ask us anything about international football. But if you ask us something about other types of football, we will answer your questions on Friday's episode, and that'll be a good bit of fun for all of us. Hurrah! Huzzah! Yes? Yes.
Hooray.
Okay, thank you.
So much
Right.
fun.
Au revoir, T-pose. Goodbye.